Howdy friends, Bevan Cohen here from Small House Farm, and today we're going to plant some cold weather crops that we can get into the garden before our last frost date and give us a great head start on the growing season. One of the earliest cold tolerant seeds that we can plant are garden peas. Now, garden peas are actually one of the oldest domesticated crops. They're from the Mediterranean region, and the original pea was a shelling type, right? So when the pod gets mature, it's kind of tough. It's an inedible hull. So we'd actually shell those out to get the peas inside, which are delicious. And there's a number of shelling peas still available today. But since then, a great variety of different peas have been developed. Snap peas with a sweet edible pod. Snow peas, you might be familiar with. They're flat. We eat them before the seeds even develop. Great in stir fries. There's a pea for everybody. There's even peas that have been developed with long edible tendrils that you could put in salads, all sorts of cool stuff. Today we're going to plant some shelling peas, and we could get started as early as 6 weeks before our last frost date. We're going to want to plant our pea seeds about 1 inch deep and about 2 inches apart down the row. We're going to want our rows to be anywhere from 7 inches to 12 inches, about a foot between them, to give them plenty of space to grow. Now these shelling peas that we're planting today, as well as a number of other pea varieties, require some sort of trellising that they can climb up. And the little tendrils will wrap around this trellis and will give these plants support to hold them up out of the soil, make them a lot easier to harvest too. We can start planting our peas when the soil temperature is anywhere from 40 to 45 degrees. That's plenty warm enough to get our peas germinated. One trick to help speed up the germination process is to soak your pea seeds overnight in warm water before you plant them the next morning. Another great veggie that we can plant pretty much the same time that we plant our spinach is radishes. Now when we're selecting our radishes, there's 2 essential types to choose from, our spring radishes and our winter radishes. And as the names imply, that's pretty much the time that we want to plant them. Spring radishes can go in the garden nice and early, and they generally grow very fast. Some radishes will even produce a crop in 21 days. That's amazing. Our winter radishes we'll tend to plant in the fall for a winter harvest, and those are those larger daikon types, watermelon radishes, much larger rootstocks, take a little bit longer to grow. Our radish seeds can be planted anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks before the last frost, when the soil temperatures are anywhere from 40 to 70 degrees. Plant your seeds shallow, only about a ½ inch deep, and space them about 4 inches apart. This will give the plants plenty of space for a good-sized root to grow. Another great crop that we can get started as soon as you can work the soil is wheat. I'm a big fan of growing wheat, and it's just something you don't see in enough homesteads. So I really hope that people get encouraged and start growing a little bit more wheat, right? Now there's different types of wheat. There's some that's planted in the fall that needs to be overwintered, called winter wheat. And the type that we're going to be planting today, spring wheat, right? Now, like I said, we're going to want to start planting this as soon as the soil is workable. Soil temperature's around 47 degrees. It's as warm as it needs to be for our seeds to germinate. There's different varieties of wheat that you could choose depending on what your ultimate goal is. What we're planting today is called durum wheat. It's a little bit higher in protein, and it's used to make semolina, which is used to make pasta. So essentially what we're doing right here is we're growing our own pasta. Now when we plant our wheat, we can either plant it in rows or we can just broadcast it into the field. But we want the seeds to be about 3 inches apart or so and about a ½ inch deep. We don't want to bury them too far into the soil. We want to keep them kind of near the surface. If you're going to grow your wheat with the cover crop, you're going to want your plants to be about 8 inches apart. We get our wheat planted about 6 weeks before our last frost. About 4 weeks before our last frost date, we can go ahead and start planting our beets. Now beets are a great crop because not only do they grow an edible root, but also the leaves are edible. The information that we need for planting our beets is exactly the same for planting Swiss chard, as they are both Beta vulgaris. Essentially they're the same plant. Swiss chard has been bred for its leaves, where beets have been bred for their edible roots. An interesting thing about beet and Swiss chard seeds is that they're actually capsules. They hold 2 to 3 seeds inside of them. So we're going to plant the seeds about 2 to 3 inches apart, a ½ inch deep. But once they come up, we're going to want to thin them out to make sure those plants have plenty of space to develop their bulbous roots. Next on the list for planting in the spring, spinach. Now, spinach is a plant that we can get going as soon as the soil can work, but we recommend 50 to 70 degrees for the best germination. As low as 45 degrees is kind of pushing it, but the spinach will certainly germinate at soil temperatures of 45 degrees. Spinach is an old crop too. It was domesticated in Persia around 2,000 years ago before it made its way to Asia and then eventually to Europe in the 11th century. There's a number of different types, but the key with all of them is that we want to get them planted early because they thrive in cool weather and cannot tolerate the heat. When it gets too warm, our spinach is going to bolt, it's going to go to seed, and it's not going to be enjoyable to eat. So as soon as we can work that soil, we should start thinking about planting our spinach. Since it's a relatively small seed, we really only need to plant our spinach about a ½ an inch deep, and we're going to space it out maybe 2 to 4 inches apart. Once the plants begin to mature, we're going to want to thin it out to maybe about 1 foot in between, 12 inches between each plant to give these plants lots of space. But there's nothing wrong with that because all these little plants that we thin out, that's baby spinach, and it is delicious and we should certainly enjoy it. One tip to help get your spinach seeds going real quick is to refrigerate the seeds for about a week before you plant them. That long, cold temperature is really going to stimulate that seed and help it grow a little bit faster. Next on our list are delicious crunchy carrots. Now, carrots were domesticated in Central Asia around 1,000 years ago, and since then so many different varieties have been developed. Different colors, shapes, sizes, long and skinny, short and stubby, perfect selections for everybody depending on your space and what kind of garden you're working with. The key with carrots is that you want to make sure that your garden bed is well worked before you plant your seeds. You want a nice loose soil so you can get great tapered roots without any of those deformities that are going to happen if there's lumps or rocks in your garden. You want to plant your carrots really lightly, only maybe about 1/4 inch beneath the soil. Keep them right near the surface, about 2 inches apart, in rows about 1 to 2 feet apart. They're going to germinate great in soil temperatures around 50 degrees, and they will thrive in temperatures from 55 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll plant our carrots about 3 weeks before the last frost, but the key here is to make sure that that seed bed stays moist until those seeds germinate. A spring garden wouldn't be complete without some lettuce. Now, lettuce is a plant that was domesticated in the Mediterranean region and quickly spread just because it was enjoyed by so many. Interesting fact, in ancient Egypt, they would actually grow lettuce specifically for its seed that they used to press for its oil. Now, I prefer to eat the lettuce for its leaves, and there's a lot of different varieties to choose from. There's your typical iceberg heading lettuces, your romaines. There's even cut and come again types, I call them. These nice leafy lettuces that you can actually harvest the leaves, and the plant will continue to grow new leaves for you to enjoy later in the season. So depending on what type of lettuce you want to grow, that's going to determine the spacing that your seeds are going to need when you plant them. We're going to surface plant our lettuce seeds. They do need light to germinate. So just sprinkle the seeds right onto the top of the soil and lightly cover them so they don't get blown away. Plant the seeds about 3 to 4 inches apart and thin it down between 6 to 18 inches, depending on the type of lettuce that you're going to grow. Our lettuce seeds need to be kept moist, and they'll germinate at temperatures at a wide range, anywhere from 40 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll start planting our lettuce around 2 weeks before the last frost. The last cold-tolerant garden crop that we're going to talk about today is kale and broccoli. Now, kale and broccoli are actually the same plant, really, Brassica oleracea. Just over time, they've been selected for different traits. And with these selections comes a slightly different tolerance for cold temperature. Broccoli is the least cold tolerant of any of these brassica plants, so we're going to plant these seeds about 2 weeks before the last frost. They'll still germinate and fine, but we won't have an established plant until after the chance of frost is going to happen, and they should be perfectly fine. Broccoli's a little bit more tender. Now, kale, on the other hand, it can really take the cold, and we can plant our kale about 4 weeks before the frost date. But what I like to do to give me a nice head start is to plant my kale seeds indoors and get a nice established plant like I have here. And these plants can go right out into the garden 4 weeks before the frost date. Let's go ahead and plant some of these. So as you can see, what we've done here is we've actually reused an old takeout container. Makes a perfect little greenhouse for starting my seeds, and I just sprinkle my kale seeds inside, and look at what we got here. So I'm going to pull these out individually, separate them out, and I'm going to lay them out into my garden. The proper spacing for kale is about 1 foot apart. And there you go, folks. It's just that easy. When we utilize these cold-tolerant crops, it gives us a head start on our gardens. Extends our growing season, thus giving us more abundant harvests. But the most important thing to remember, when you're out there in the garden, make sure you're having fun. All right, happy growing, friends.